The Half-Life series of games are some of my favorites of all time.
Gordon Freeman.
And being an avid railfan, it's hard not to notice the abundance of trains throughout the games. I mean, you literally start Half-Life 1 and 2 on a train. That is, as protagonist Gordon Freeman on his way to work and City 17 respectively. Additionally, you'll find trains in the expansion packs for Half-Life, opposing Force and Blue Shift. In Half-Life 2, along with episodes 1 and 2, you encounter the Combine Ran railway system on more than several occasions. In this video, I'll be analyzing the locomotives and rolling stock of the Half-Life series and compare them to their real-life counterparts. Locomotives first, rolling stock second. Let's start with the Black Mesa Transit System, located at the Black Mesa Research Facility in New Mexico, USA. For starters, you'll notice this isn't your conventional railroad. Rather, it's a monorail. Not much is known regarding the design of the Black Mesa monorail, but the idea to use one might have been inspired by the Seattle monorail in Seattle, Washington, USA. Valve is located in Bellevue, right next door to Seattle. One notable thing about the Black Mesa monorail is that it combines a conventional monorail with a suspension railway, a type of monorail. This idea may take inspiration from the Wuppertal suspension railway in Germany. As for the tram itself, the design seems largely fictitious. However, it retains the relatively boxy design typically seen with monorail cars. We'll now move into Sector E materials transport. Here, Gordon Freeman uses a freight tram monorail to navigate the complex. The unit itself appears to be an original design, although it may take inspiration from underground mining trains. We're now outside in the freight yard where we find a small switching engine. Once again, it seems pretty fictitious, but again, it may be based on mining engines. While we're out here, let's cover the freight cars. The flat cars are really just bog standard railroad flat cars, nothing much to them. However, it seems Black Mesa has decided to use the cars to load up intermodal containers, a practice more commonly seen in Europe and Asia. While not unheard of in the US, containers are typically loaded in well cars like these as opposed to flat cars. Also seen in the yard is a typical American depressed flat car used for heavier loads. One last notable item is this New Mexico Railroad Line sign. While no such railroad exists or existed, there is the Black Mesa and Lake Powell Railroad, although it's located in northeastern Arizona. Unfortunately, as of the making of this video, it's currently being dismantled as the coal power plant it serves is shutting down. Just a neat little side fact. Half-Life 2 followed up Half-Life and its expansions in 2004. Before we had the sequel we all know though, there was the beta version of Half-Life 2. It was an even darker game compared to the final release, but on top of that difference, various train models were cut or altered prior to the final version. Half-Life 2 for most of its development had an Eastern European architectural style, and the vehicles tended to reflect this Soviet influence. We'll start with this city tram model. Seen on E3C1702 and Prefab Streets Boulevard, they resemble the LM-33, a tram built by the Petersburg Tram Mechanical Factory between 1933 and 1939. These trams operated in and around Leningrad, Russia from 1933 to 1979. Two LM-33s are preserved at the Museum of Electrical Transport in St. Petersburg. The second and last train for the Half-Life 2 beta is the original Razor train. Safe to say the design is pretty fictitious, following the typical monolithic Combine design. It almost looks like the armored train from GoldenEye. Perhaps in reality though, Valve completely freelanced the design and or might have taken inspiration from the armored trains of World War I and II. While on the topic of the Razor train, let's move on to the retail release of Half-Life 2 and its episodes and take a look at the final versions of the trains as well. The final Razor train follows standard Combine design choices, but does have a bit of similarity to the Fairbanks Morse H10-44. It was built in the US between 1944 and 1950, and the locomotive primarily acted as a switcher and in local freight service. It seems as if Valve took the engine and basically stretched it out real long and tall. The iconic horn is a British Columbia Railway Nathan K5H, a notable horn introduced in 1954 Canada. seeing as the cars the Razor train carries are the only ones it ever does, I'll just briefly cover them in this locomotive section. They're pretty fictitious and don't seem to be based on any common rail car. Now let's take a look at some more conventional rail equipment. The locomotive leading the train Gordon gets off of is based on the DR-1. The DR-1 was built beginning in 1963 for suburban commuter service in the Soviet Union. Comparing the in-game model to the real-life counterpart, the real DR-1 acts as a diesel multiple unit, or DMU, train set as opposed to the seemingly individual locomotives seen in-game. The prototype also has a much longer passenger compartment on the power car compared to Half-Life as well. In-game, the DR-1 shares the same horn as the Razor train, though in real life, that's not accurate by any means. Walking out into the streets of City 17 reveals the station facade. The station was modeled after the Western Railway Terminal in Budapest, Hungary, which was built in 1887. Another piece of rail infrastructure in Half-Life is the signals, those of which are French designs, strangely enough. Episode 1 doesn't feature any new locomotives or train sets, so we'll skip ahead to Episode 2. For this locomotive, interestingly enough, it went unused, and it's an American design as opposed to European. It goes by diesel.mdl and resembles that of an EMD GP40 or GP60. The GP40 was built between 1965 and 1971, while the GP60 was built between 1985 and 1994. Both locomotives operate in switching and freight operations across American railroads. The most glaring difference with the model is the oversized frame and wheels, along with tiny crew windows and massive vent on the side. The locomotive might have been cut from the game as Valve thought it didn't fit the scene of the predominantly European rail cars, but otherwise the reasoning is unknown. Now let's move on to some actual retail models. On the way to White Forest at Victory Mine, a TEM-2, later classified as SM-48, locomotive is seen in the small rail yard. It was based on exported versions of the American Locomotive Company, or ALCO, RSD-1 sent to the USSR in 1945. The TEM-2 has been used in heavy switching operations throughout former Soviet republics and has proved quite the reliable machine. We've covered all the locomotives and train sets seen in Half-Life 2 in its episodes, so now it's time for rolling stock. The passenger car Gordon rides into City 17 seems like a shortened version of the trailer car seen on the ER9 Electric Multiple Unit Train Set, or EMU. These were mass-produced beginning in 1962. Just behind the passenger car is a green boxcar. It was likely based on this 1970s era Russian boxcar. Same deal with this gray and rusted brown variation. Right outside the station is this tank car. It's a fairly standard and universal tank car design, though it falls more in line with Eastern European designs. During the chapter Red Letter Day, as Gordon heads on foot for Black Mesa East, we encounter something that harkens back to the first Half-Life in the freight yard. An intermodal container on a flat car, or perhaps a hybrid of a 40-foot boxcar and intermodal container. Hybrid based on the frame and different material roof. If that's the case, this is simply a fictional design. At the end of Episode 1, we first see this passenger car at the technical train station. It seems mostly freelance, but bears some resemblance to narrow-gauge passenger cars on Central and Eastern European railways. The car also looks similar to some older standard-gauge passenger cars in various former Soviet republics. In the developer commentary, it said that Valve took inspiration from 1980s European railcars and created what was meant to be a combined caboose and passenger car. At the beginning of Episode 2, the passenger car Gordon slides down appears to be a rounder, longer version of the car from Episode 1. With the larger windows and rounded roof, it seems to be based on pre-war passenger cars in Germany. Moving on to Victory Mine, there's a pair of open hopper cars loaded with coal. The car seems to be a cross between this 1977 Russian covered grain hopper and this 1974 stone hopper. Just outside Station 21 in Episode 2, there's a new variety pack of rail cars. First up is this pair of American white boxcars. This one is Conrail number 60301, a 40-foot boxcar built in 1956 for Reading lines. It was converted into a maintenance supply car in 1977. The other boxcar is Conrail number 60311, but you may notice it has vague REA and RDG markings. These stand for Reading lines. This is yet another former Reading 40-foot boxcar converted into a maintenance car by Conrail in 1977. Staying on the topic of boxcars, this very rusty yellow one seems to be a refrigeration or reefer boxcar meant for hauling perishables like fruits and vegetables. In that case, this is likely a 50-foot RBNX reefer for the Fruit Growers Express Company. RBNX is a bit of a guess based on the NX on the in-game model plus the ACI identification plate. These reefers were built from 1963 and into the 1970s. These destroyed boxcars are just freelance designs, though possibly based on 40-foot American boxcars. Moving on from boxcars, we have yet another American car, PCS Phosphate Company, or WACX number 151044. This is a 43-foot tank car built in 1989 to haul phosphoric acid. These days, the car runs as Inofis Incorporated, or IPBX number 17503. Interestingly enough, the tank car, 2 white boxcars, and yellow locomotive mentioned earlier have origins in Counter-Strike Source on the map DE Train. Back to Half-Life, this seemingly generic flat car is actually Norfolk Southern number 157213. It's an FS-135 flat car used for truck trailers. Next up is this large flat car full of logs. It doesn't seem to have an exact basis other than maybe a skeleton log flat car. Now let's end off where we began with freight cars. Here we have a generic flat car design similar to that like we saw back in Black Mesa. Well, that just about covers all the trains seen throughout the Half-Life series. It's an interesting mix of rail equipment you won't see anywhere but the Half-Life universe. I may create a follow-up video after Half-Life Alyx releases, and then a third follow-up video hopefully someday when Gabe Newell graces us with
Episode 3.
Thank you for watching.
Have a very safe day.
In the meantime, this is where I get off.